Hello, and thanks for joining us for this brief video on cash reserves, policies and procedures, why and how. Let's look at a few questions which pertain to cash reserve policies. First of all, why do we keep cash reserves? In a business environment like the current one, we should be concerned about stability or even continuity of our business, not just our business, but also our employees who could be very affected. So the next question is, how much should we hold in reserve? And the answer is, it depends. It depends on the size of your business. It depends on the risk appetite of your leadership team and shareholders. But often we look at our average operating costs and we try to keep perhaps 3 months at a minimum of average operating costs in reserve. You may want to be more aggressive and keep a larger number, say 6 months. What comprises average operating costs? Again, this will depend to some degree on what business you're in. Certainly, the recurring, predictable expenses should be incorporated into average operating costs. But if you're in a high growth phase or a changing business environment, you may make some additional provision for irregular expenses that you might incur and hold those in reserve as well. Another question is, what are the triggers that enable you to access these cash reserves? These arise from unanticipated loss of funding. Let's say you have a lender who's no longer able to lend you cash, or an investor who can no longer provide funding to your business. Perhaps it's from your customers who are no longer able to buy your goods and services. One big customer or many of your customers may suffer that, and you will have a loss of revenue. You may dip into cash reserves at this point. The other thing that may occur is a sudden increase in expenses, especially an unanticipated expense. You might have thought you need only 10 people on a particular project, but it turns out you need 15 or 17 or 20 people. And of course, there are times where we suffer unbudgeted expenses. Perhaps you lose a lawsuit or some other extraordinary event in the business which was not foreseen. We might tap into cash reserves at this point. But keep in mind, cash reserves are not there simply because the business isn't going very well to eliminate an ongoing budget gap. We use reserves only for extraordinary situations, and that's what your cash reserve policy should say. Kind of an obvious point, but where do you keep the cash reserves? It's important to get really disciplined about this and keep them in a segregated account. Don't mingle the funds with your other cash resources. And if you're going to the trouble of creating cash reserves and cash reserves policies, then you should also delegate authority to a particular individual who should apply to access the cash reserves and obtain approval from some body, a finance committee, the board, the CEO, the management team, and then report on how those cash reserves are used and, importantly, how they'll be replenished into the business. These are some of the basic aspects of cash reserve policies. We hope you've benefited from that, and we look forward to having you on our future videos. Thank you.